everyone. My name is Matthew Fritz. I've been an engineer since 1995, and I have a penchant for trying to make things do other things that they weren't necessarily originally intended for. So I like trying to find new uses for existing technology. So today I'm going to be doing that with the AmpKnob RevC from Bogren Digital. Let me preface this by saying I love Bogren Digital's gear. Linus, Jacek, Jens, you guys are awesome. It also helps that Jens is one of my absolute favorite music producers in the world, so I'm glad I finally have a chance to use some equipment that he's actually really truly dialed in for my own stuff, because there's an album I'm working on. So I'm really excited about that. Now, as a bit of a backstory, I was working on laying down some guitar tunes this morning, and I was playing with the AmpKnob. And I got to thinking, this is really great for guitars, but what about vocals? Let's see what happens when we actually put the AmpKnob onto some vocal tracks. And I was pleasantly surprised with the results. So one of the other things that I found that you can do with the AmpKnob is not just involving music, but there's also some semblance of sound design as well. So let's go ahead and get into that just a little bit. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into Audacity here. So for proof of concept stuff, I typically use Audacity. I'm also using my Logitech USB headset to record just simple audio, nothing really too fancy, not super fancy gears, kind of budget equipment, so you can see the microphone input there on the headset. All right, so let's go ahead and just lay down a basic vocal sequence. Based upon the things that I'm thinking of and the kinds of examples I was playing around with this morning, let's do something that you might hear in maybe a group setting. So let's go ahead and do that now. Patient 0 has escaped. Containment procedures have been enacted. Let's play that back, see how it sounds just on its own. Patient 0 has escaped. Containment procedures have been enacted. All right, not too bad. So we have our initial vocal track down. Let's now go ahead and put the AmpKnob on it. So we'll go ahead and just add the effect in Audacity. I have a ton of effects that I like to use. When I'm doing proof of concept stuff, I tend to just use Audacity because it's free and it's nice and quick. But if I'm really actively recording and mixing and trying to really lay tracks down, that'll be something I'll do in Cubase. But right now, because I'm doing a proof of concept, we're going to stay in Audacity. So let's add the AmpKnob as an effect to the track, open it up, and move it out of the way, so we can actually see what we're working on here. Okay, so we have the AmpKnob here, and what I want to do first is just to show what everything sounds like when you've bypassed the effect. It should still sound pretty much the exact same as when we initially recorded it. So let's take a listen to that now. So now we have the AmpKnob RevC bypassed. And what does it sound like? Patient 0 has escaped. Containment procedures have been enacted. Okay, so it sounds the exact same. The effect has been bypassed. Now let's turn it on, and we're going to play it again. You'll see really what I'm talking about here when I mention sound design and the kinds of things you'll be able to record and actually put this on in terms of vocals. So it has some really unique character to it, but let's go ahead and do that now. So we'll click the effect back on, and I want to make a point to note that the gain is already turned all the way down. So all we're doing is we're running this vocal track through the AmpKnob when the gain is set to 0. So let's see how that sounds. Patient 0 has escaped. Containment procedures have been enacted. Okay, now that's pretty cool. Just at a default 0.0 gain setting, you get what sounds like a communication over a radio, like maybe a handset radio, like maybe you have potentially soldiers or containment units talking to each other. This is what I was talking about when I said sound design. It's not the easiest thing in the world to get a decent radio style effect when you're working with vocal tracks, excuse me. The AmpKnob makes that extremely, extremely easy because its default setting with no gain gives you this fantastic radio effect. So if you're working with vocal tracks and you want to simulate possibly, units talking to each other or people talking to each other over the radio in general, saying whatever you want, this is a really, really good choice out of the box. So let's listen to that one more time before we start playing with the gain. Patient 0 has escaped. Containment procedures have been enacted. All right, there we go. Now let's start playing with the gain a little bit. So the reason we're going to play with the gain is so we can see how the additional overdrive and distortion actually affects our vocal track. So let's turn it up a little bit. Now, if you're looking at the RevC, you're going to notice that it only has a single knob, which is fantastic. So you can dial in your tone with just a single setting, and that's really cool. But one thing you'll also notice right here is that there's an etching right under where it says RevC. That etching is essentially Jens Bogren's sweet spot that he has dialed into this instrument. It's around a gain of 0.9. So we'll get to that initially, but let's actually go and kind of turn up the gain gradually to see how our sound changes. So because that sweet spot is at 0.9 roughly, let's start with a gain of about 0.3 and see what we get out of it. All right, let's see how that affects it. Patient 0 has escaped. Containment procedures have been enacted. Okay, so we've gone from kind of a single handset radio sound to something approaching maybe like a small megaphone. We've gotten some additional distortion onto this sound, and maybe now we're trying to broadcast to a larger group of people instead of just maybe one person talking to another. So we're approaching this really cool megaphone sound. As we get higher and higher with the actual gain setting on the AmpKnob, we'll notice that additional distortion kind of starts happening almost in front of and behind our actual vocals for this track. So now that we know what 0.3 sounds like, let's take it up to, let's say 0.5. About, all right. Let's play that back. Let's see what we get. Patient 0 has escaped. Containment procedures have been enacted. Okay, so maybe we're going from a bit of a smaller megaphone sound to now an overall maybe speaker or intercom system in a building. And you're trying to actually, let's say, since we're talking about patient 0, maybe you're talking about a hospital. And this might be how you're broadcasting a containment breach signal and a containment breach notification and alert to more of your staff. And you're trying to get a larger group of people involved. So as we turn the gain up, our sound gets a little more distorted, but the higher we turn the gain, it seems like we're getting more of an emulation of larger pieces of sound equipment for vocals that would theoretically broadcast to larger groups of people. That feeling will eventually subside because we'll hit a point where we just get so saturated with the overdrive and distortion that we won't get larger emulated pieces of equipment. But we're moving toward that area right now. So now we're at about, let's say, the speaker system of, let's say, a smaller hospital. So since we're on 0.5, let's turn that up to 0.7 and see what we get. At this point, I'm going to suggest you turn down your volume a little bit because we're getting a little bit louder now. So let's turn it up to 0.7, and again, turn your volume down a little bit if you actually enjoy being able to hear.
Patient 0 has escaped. Containment procedures have been enacted.
All right, so a larger broadcast system now. Maybe this is going from, a unit within a hospital to maybe the entire hospital building itself. We have our patient 0 escaping and needing to contain the situation. So maybe we're needing to involve more units and maybe start bringing the authorities in outside of this hospital setting. So let's turn this up a little bit more to 0.8. And you'll notice as we turn the gain up, we're approaching that sweet spot that's been etched in. So let's see what 0.8 sounds like before we actually hit that sweet spot. All right, let's do it at about the 12 o'clock position and see what we get now. And again, if you hadn't turned your speakers or volume down before, you definitely might want to do that now. Just fair warning. Here we go.
Patient 0 has escaped. Containment procedures have been enacted.
All right, so we're muddying the sound a little bit here, and we're getting a more distorted feel to it. So now maybe there's starting to be some feedback. And maybe you're getting a combination of a larger speaker system that is also being sent out over the radio. So maybe you're now getting like multiple actual broadcast sources, and you're getting these larger units involved, and more people are trying to work together to actually contain this situation. All right, now that's 0.8. Let's officially move to the sweet spot of 0.9 and see what we get. So that's right about on the sweet spot where that etching is pointing to at 0.9. I'm really excited. I want to see what this sounds like. This has been really, really cool so far, and I love doing these kinds of experiments with equipment. All right, here we go.
Patient 0 has escaped. Containment procedures have been enacted.
The first thing that comes to my mind when I hear the quality of this audio is an emergency alert system broadcast. You know, when you hear those EAS tones, and all of a sudden, like, you're getting an alert for like maybe a flash flood warning or a fire warning or something like that, the audio is usually pretty poor in terms of quality, but it's loud. And so the sweet spot of 0.9 on the AmpKnob for vocals, in my mind, matches the kind of vocals that you would hear in an emergency alert system broadcast telling you the details of the emergency that's currently taking place. So I can understand why that sweet spot is etched right there, because now we're at a point where we're actually informing essentially, you know, maybe multiple cities or towns or, you know, maybe an entire state at this point. So maybe the breach has now gotten so bad that many others are already infected by this patient 0, and you're having to bring in even more groups and broadcast more to the public, essentially telling them to stay inside. Now, because that's the sweet spot, let's see what happens when we take it further. I don't really know what the saturation is going to be like, but let's take it to 1.1 at about the 3 o'clock position. Let's see what we get. Here we go.
Patient 0 has escaped. Containment procedures have been enacted.
All right, I'm still getting an EAS feel to this, but the quality of the audio has degraded a little bit more, and maybe this is something approaching like a nationwide broadcast, as opposed to just letting the states themselves handle this. And for context, I'm in the United States. So instead of maybe just letting the states handle it and use their own EAS systems, maybe what's happening now is we have some sound design for a nationwide broadcast, and we're approaching like a full federal response to this situation. And now, just because we can, and I want to max it out to see what happens, since I've been taking us around essentially the clock that is the gain knob, let's see what happens if we take the gain all the way up to about, let's call that the 5 o'clock position. So that's going to be a gain value of 1.3. This is as far as the knob will go. Let's see what we get. Here we go.
Patient 0 has escaped. Containment procedures have been enacted.
All right, so that's pretty cool. One of the things that we get is a whole lot of background noise. So the context for that from a sound design perspective could be that there's a whole bunch of activity going on in the background. Maybe you're outside. Maybe this broadcast is coming from a very, very hectic location, and the microphones that are being used to transmit this message are picking up a whole bunch of just hectic activity, and that's the result of a whole bunch of background noise. Maybe people are running around. Maybe things are starting to crash. This is the kind of place where, in terms of audio, you start thinking in the context of maybe just this absolutely horrific event has occurred, and maybe you're essentially on your own at this point, and the authorities have essentially gotten outnumbered by what is now a swarm of whatever patient 0 initially was. The choices are really up to you in terms of how you want to design your audio. But I wanted to make sure I showed different positions of the AmpKnob RevC to show that not only is it incredibly useful for guitars, and that was really its original intent, it is very, very useful for vocals from a design perspective, especially if you want to go from radio to Megaphone to large-scale speaker system to EAS scenarios. Really whatever your mind desires and whatever you can think of, you can absolutely do. So that's going to end this here. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you all have a good one. Take care.